You know what that means? It's time for Explain and Verify. Now, soon after assuming office, President Cyril Ramaphosa committed government to raise 1.2 trillion rand worth of investments over 5 years. Today, we're here to explain and verify how much of these investment pledges have in fact become real investments. Samgele?
Well, Bongiwe, according to the DTIC, investment pledges achieved during the investment mobilization drive reached 1.5 trillion, exceeding the target by 26%. President Cyril Ramaphosa has since set a new investment committing to raise 2 trillion rands worth of investments for another 5 years. However, let's look at how much of the pledges have actually materialized into the South African economy. Bongiwe, at this point in time, we look at the pledges and the various sectors. The total number of projects are 317. That is 1.5 trillion rands. That exceeds the target by 26% that the president had set. Projects completed to date. Out of these investment drives, 124. That is 318.4 billion rands. That is already completed, and that's into the economy of the country. Projects under construction at this point in time are 90. That is worth 483.3 billion rands worth of projects currently under construction. Projects in early stages of implementation, 52. That is 338.3 billion rands worth of projects currently in the stages of implementation. That would be, one would be assuming planning phase, going through the various municipal bylaws and government regulations and red tapes and bottlenecks at this point in time. Projects delayed and on hold, those are 30, 55.2 billion rands worth of projects currently delayed or on hold. Private finance, this is particular sector financed by the private sector, 18.8 billion rands. That is private finance. DFIs, foreign direct investments into the country, that is 221.6 billion rands worth of projects currently coming from direct foreign investments. Announcements of additional projects, that amounts to 55.7 billion rands, Bongiwe. And that is some of the projects that are currently being rolled out by government in these investment pledges of President Cyril Ramaphosa.
And of course, I'm keen to see the pledges by region and how these ones are looking.
If we go to the second graphic, Bongiwe, and it will tell you particularly where the investments are coming from. We've had an investment strike by South African businesses over the past 9 years or so of former President Jacob Zuma's years in office. Then ultimately the new dawn came into South Africa's political sphere with the emergence of Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of the ANC and ultimately of the country. That domestic investment strike was seemingly curtailed with new hope and investments coming into the country. Domestically, out of those particular pledges of 1.5 trillion, 55% come from domestic companies that have invested in the president's investment drive. 45%, Bongiwe, come from foreign direct investments into the country. So at this point in time, we can safely say that these pledges of 1.5 trillion rands that the president has gotten has been of those companies that are based domestically and business people domestically. 45% come from foreign investors. Then we go into the regions, Bongiwe, which is our next particular slide. It will tell you that the European Union, EU, that is 47 pledges. That amounts to 13.9%. Then you go to the United States of America, which is South Africa's second biggest trading partner. That goes to 17 pledges at 5.3%. And you look at the frosty financial relations and trade relations and political relations that have been there with South Africa and the United States of America, particularly how South Africa has been seen to be more leaning towards China and Russia and the South-South relations, particularly with the expansion of BRICS, the bringing on of Iran into the BRICS formation and other countries that are not seemingly aligned with the United States of America. You'd remember it was Saudi Arabia where President Cyril Ramaphosa in his last trip to that particular country brokered that deal. I remember we had traveled there as well for Saudi Arabia to join the BRICS formations. Then South Africa's biggest trading partner, they've got 10 pledges, that is 3.2%. Also, if you look at South Africa's economic trade with China, it is largely skewed in China's favor and not in South Africa's favor. But China is trying to appease South Africa by saying that they are willing to import more finished products from South Africa into their market in order to balance the economic trading scales between the two countries, Bongiwe.
And of course, there's been quite a lot of focus on that relationship and how maybe the scales might need to tilt a bit. But Samgela, how much does the country need, particularly when it comes to investments for desired growth?
Well, Bongiwe, that particular question, let's ask some of the experts whom are in that particular space in econometrics. Dr. Azar Jamin, very good evening to you, Dr. Jamin. How are you this evening?
I'm very well, thanks, but I've been listened by the network in the entire area. I don't know, the telecom network is broken down. So
No, it's
okay. To speak myself. Yeah.
It's okay. We can get through this particular discussion. In essence, sure. Doctor, how is South Africa? How much investments does South Africa need in order to get the economy up and running again and kicking on all 12 cylinders?
It is such a critical question that you are asking. What has happened, what has contributed to the decline in South Africa's economic growth performance over the last 15 years has been a decline in the level of investment from 24% of GDP to a low point of below 13% of GDP 2 years ago. It's now up at 14.8% of GDP. The average of emerging markets, excluding China, is around 25 to 28% of GDP. In other words, double the level of investment that we are currently putting into the economy. And if you include China, well, the figure goes up to 32%. So we have to basically double the amount that we're investing in the economy. And the big question that I ask is, with all these wonderful numbers that have been produced about the pledges for investment, why has our capital investment been falling as a percentage of GDP and dragging down economic growth from what it could otherwise have been right until the present? We are just not seeing the impact in terms of the figures on capital investment that we ought to be seeing. The construction sector is in the absolute doldrums. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are being lost, but we are not seeing the manifestation of these pledges in actual business activity.
When you look at these particular pledges, President Ramaphosa has achieved that 1.5 trillion rands of pledges into the country. Are we seeing that domestic economic powerhouses that have been on an investment strike, particularly during the era of former President Jacob Zuma, are they finally releasing those particular balance sheets and flowing the money into the economy once again?
Well, a lot of it has been going abroad, and many of our top companies are finding it more profitable to operate abroad than in South Africa. And secondly, there's been one must be very careful about talking about an investment strike, because as much as I've been talking about how investment has been falling, private sector investment has actually been rising as a proportion of that total level of investment. The real decline in investment has been by government and the public sector, especially state-owned enterprises, where they have just where the funds that they should have had available for investment have been eaten away through state capture over the past decade and a half. That is the critical reason why we are not seeing an upswing in investment. Eskom doesn't have money to invest. There's a distinct program now to build 14,000 kilometers of transmission lines for renewable projects. Last year we succeeded in building 74 out of those 14,000 kilometers of transmission lines. Transnet is supposed to be raising the amount of the volume through our ports, which have declined from 228 to 145 tons per year in the last 6 years. There's very little sign of that picking up as yet. So we're just not seeing that investment by state-owned enterprises taking place. And attempts are now being made to try and attract private sector involvement in trying to ameliorate the situation, but then that is being opposed vehemently by the trade union movement. So we're not seeing the progress that we ought to be seeing.
When you bring up the issue of Transnet, you look at some of the rail lines, particularly going into the Richards Bay Coal Terminal and going into the Durban port as well. What are some of the huge bottlenecks that the private sector is raising with government with those particular rail lines being dysfunctional, being destroyed, particularly during the era where COVID-19 had struck and the country had been on lockdown and that infrastructure was dilapidated? You look at the number of trucks on the roads as well.
Well, the problem started long before COVID, actually. But COVID obviously exacerbated it all. And what we've seen is a lot of sabotage so that people can sell the metal for a bit of money to live off, the rogues. And then you've had a lot of extortion also interfering and making it extremely difficult for these attempts at trying to rehabilitate the infrastructure itself and the rail network.
Which are some of the economic sectors that attract most of South Africa's foreign direct investment into the country, looking that our ports are largely used to import these particular goods? You look at the dysfunctionality of some of our roads, the blockade at the N3, some of the countries within the SADC region and the African continent that use the Durban port and the Richards Bay Coal Terminal as a gateway into the market in the world. They've diverted into Namibia, some have diverted into Mozambique.
You've explained it very well there. What are the sectors? Obviously, the motor sector, the agricultural sector, where we've lost a lot of ability to export, especially in the citrus industry, the wine sector as well, and of course, more generally, it acts as a deterrent for business generally to come into and out of the country. And obviously, we've lost a fortune of money in not being able to exploit the surge in the coal price a couple of years ago because we weren't able to export as much coal as we could have when the price was at record levels. And that kind of obstruction is still prevailing. We hear every now and then of moves to attempt that there's some success here and there. But I look at my charts and the latest figures, and they show very little improvement yet. That is why the economy is not picking up as much as it could have been doing now in the absence of load shedding and in the face of increased interest in the country following the formation of the government of national unity.
When you look at South Africa's trading partners, China is now South Africa's largest trading partner, and China has expressed it wants to import more finished products from South Africa. What are some of the sectors that South Africa should be focusing on in order to meet China's commitment of those finished products? Particularly when you look at the ANC, it says that they can no longer be exporting dust and rocks into the foreign markets as opposed to it rather beneficiation and exporting finished products.
Well, obviously, there's processed minerals that if we could beneficiate minerals more effectively and productively and cheaply, we could be exploiting that. The motor industry has been a cornerstone of our industrial policy. I don't know whether China wants to buy South African motor vehicles in the way that the West has been doing. That's a possibility. And then, of course, agricultural products more than anything. That is where we can really export largely into China and make a killing. And our wines and citrus and other deciduous fruit, that is what we should be looking at. But our ports are blocking that and have been rated to be amongst the worst in the world. And that's why China is moving to other African countries to exploit that. South Africa's potential is enormous if we could just unlock some of these bottlenecks. But we're struggling to do so. State capture has done and inflicted a huge amount of damage to the economy over the last 15 years. And it's remarkable to see that the perpetrators of state capture are still being supported by such a large portion of the South African society.
Thank you very much for this particular discussion, Dr. Echamin. Interestingly, Bongiwe, when you look at the exports and imports between the trade relations between South Africa and China, there is a lot of influx of Chinese vehicles into the South African market at this point in time. And if you look at the automobile sector of South Africa, it's been largely dominated by brands from European countries from the West. And that will then bring about the question, what do these manufacturers, particularly of Western countries, European countries, what do they do with strengthened trade relations between South Africa and China, with that influx of finished Chinese vehicles into the South African market, as South Africa exports most vehicles into the Western market that are built either in East London, PE, or you go to the automobile capital within Gauteng, which is Tshwane.
And of course, Samgele, all of this, I suppose, now puts us in the place where we now need to look at, in terms of the percentages of these particular pledges, and how much of this 1.5 trillion has actually materialized.
Well, Bongiwe, the Department of DTIC there has said that there has been some progress. Let's look at some of these particular total investment pledges that have flowed into the South African economy that have been received. 601.6 billion rands is already in circulation within the South African economy. About 40% of the 1.5 trillion rands has already been received. And that will tell you, Bongiwe, that there is some sort of progress, but that progress is relatively slow, particularly looking at some of the economic problems and energy problems that the country has faced. Eskom has not been performing well. It's only of recent months, with Dan Morekani having taken over as CEO of Eskom, and Mr. Mteto Mnyati has taken over as the chairperson of the board of the power utility, that we've got a surplus in energy generation, over 200 days without any load shedding within the country, business activity, industrialization, where there are industries is taking place. And that brings about some of the issues that the president has said, that South Africa must reindustrialize. You go to former industrial hubs of the country. I'll bring you a textile manufacturing hub, which was an area in the Eastern Cape, Dimbaza. Those particular factories are lying fallow. Now you look at how the textile industry within the country has basically been dilapidated, and you find more foreign products coming from the Chinese into the South African market. Some of these particular products have been deemed inferior. Some of them have been stopped, particularly in South African ports, by customs. And that will then tell you that the South African economy is very complex. There are problems that are there, but with energy security and energy generation, it will give you a guarantee of a country that can reindustrialize, and particularly with the private-public partnerships that are taking place, and also with the new power stations, Kusile, and also it's Kusile and Medupi, that are already coming on stream as well. I've seen in some of our reports where we reported on Kusile, some of those particular generating units are all on stream at this point in time. You look at how the Koeberg nuclear power station is also being revamped, and the Minister of Electricity and Energy within the country, he is also going out on tender, particularly for that 2,600 megawatt nuclear power station that will be brought on stream in order to fast-track economic growth within the country.
And of course, we often hear about these green shoots, but maybe another area we need to look at is to take stock of the textile industry and really just look at the bloodbath that has been there. But thank you so much, Samgele. President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned that while there is a broadly positive attitude towards South Africa among investors, the country's foreign direct investment of 1.4% as a percentage of GDP in 2023 was slightly lower than the global average, and work needs to be done for South Africa to attain sustainable growth. And that's how we wrap up Explain and Verify.